Hey there, and welcome back to Momma Drama and Trauma. I'm your host, Jenny Kimmel, and this month we're anchoring everything around boundaries. Not the kind of boundaries that feel cold or harsh or like walls we build to keep people out, but the kind of boundaries that protect your heart, your peace, and your sense of self while you're healing and rebuilding your life. And for week 1, we're starting with emotional boundaries. Because for so many of us, emotional boundaries are the hardest ones to name, the hardest ones to hold, and the easiest ones to lose. We can set physical boundaries. We can say yes or no to plans. We can decide where we go and who we spend time with. But emotional boundaries live inside of us. They show up in how much we carry for other people, how much responsibility we take for other people's feelings, how much we absorb other people's pain, insecurities, moods, and expectations, and quietly make them our own. For a long time, I didn't even have language for emotional boundaries. I just thought I was being loving. I thought I was being supportive. I thought I was being a good partner, a good mom, a good friend. And somewhere along the way, I lost sight of where other people's emotions ended and where mine began. So today, I want to talk about what emotional boundaries look like in my life before everything fell apart, how I learned them, how I misunderstood them, and how I slowly started realizing that loving people does not mean carrying what is not yours to carry. Where I learned to carry emotional weight. When I look back on my relationship with emotional boundaries, I don't think it started with me being the fixer as a kid. I wasn't the one who carried everything emotionally in my family growing up. If anything, my mom was that person. She was the peacekeeper. She was the emotionally steady one. She was the one who knew how to hold things together, how to show up for people, how to care without falling apart. And I admired that about her. I still do. My mom is one of the most emotionally stable people I know. She is grounding, she is calm, she is steady. And because she was like that, I think I learned by watching her. I learned that being loving meant being emotionally present for other people. I learned that being strong meant holding things together. I learned that being a good person meant showing up emotionally even when it was hard. So I don't think I was born into carrying emotional weight. I think I learned it. I absorbed it. I saw what love looked like through the lens of my mom, and I tried to mirror that in my own life. And then I got married, and in my marriage, emotional boundaries became very blurred. I felt responsible for my partner's emotions. I felt like how he felt was connected to me. If he was upset, I internalized that. If he was distant, I felt like I had done something wrong. If he was stressed, I felt like it was my job to fix it or soften it or make it better. Somewhere along the way, I took on this unspoken role of emotional caretaker. Not because anyone explicitly told me to, but because that's what I thought love was. I thought being a good partner meant being emotionally available in a way that sometimes meant abandoning myself. I didn't have language for emotional boundaries. I didn't know that I could care about how someone felt without taking responsibility for how they felt. And when conflict happened, I didn't over-explain or over-accommodate. I shut down. That was my pattern. When things got hard emotionally, I went quiet. I needed space to process. I needed time to sit with my own thoughts and feelings and figure out what I even felt before I could talk about it. That was always a point of tension in my marriage. I was called stubborn, hard-headed, but the truth is, I just needed a minute to collect myself. I needed time to understand what the argument was even about in my own mind. And looking back, I can see how our communication suffered because of that. Not because one way was right or wrong, but because we didn't know how to meet each other emotionally. I needed space to process. He wanted quick resolution without always understanding what he was apologizing for. And so things stayed unresolved emotionally, even when they were resolved on the surface. Emotionally, I was also the foundation of our household, not because I was stronger than everyone else, but because I was the one who was there every single day. When someone is gone for work 6 or 7 months out of the year, the person who remains becomes the emotional anchor by default. I was the one who held things together for the kids. I was the one who managed the emotional tone of our home. I was the one who kept things moving. And for a long time, I wore that like a badge of honor. I didn't realize how heavy it was. I didn't realize how much of myself I was pouring into everyone else without ever stopping to ask who was holding me emotionally. The emotional cost of carrying too much. For a long time, I didn't recognize what I was doing as emotional labor. I just thought this was what it meant to love people well. I thought this was what it meant to be dependable, to be the strong one, to be the person others could lean on. I didn't have language for the way I was carrying emotional weight that wasn't actually mine to carry. I only knew that I was tired, and I didn't really understand why. There's a quiet way you start to disappear when you're always holding space for everyone else. It doesn't happen all at once. It happens in small, invisible ways. You become the person people vent to. You become the one who absorbs the tension in the room. You become the emotional container for other people's stress, fears, frustrations, and insecurities. And because you care, you let it happen. Because you love deeply, you tell yourself that this is just part of being a good person. But over time, it starts to cost you something. It costs you energy. It costs you peace. It costs you emotional safety. And the hardest part is that you don't always realize you're paying that cost until you're already exhausted. I noticed this pattern not just in my marriage, but in other relationships too. There were moments where I felt like I was carrying other people's insecurities, other people's fears, other people's emotional projections. And I didn't want to be cold. I didn't want to be distant. I didn't want to be the person who says, that's not mine to carry, because that felt unkind. So instead, I held it. I carried it. I tried to understand it. I tried to soothe it. I tried to make it lighter for them, but nobody was making it lighter for me. And that's not because people didn't care about me. I had people who loved me. I had people who supported me. But there is a difference between being loved and being emotionally supported in the way you actually need. There is a difference between people caring about you and people truly holding space for you the way you hold space for them. When you are used to being the emotional foundation, you don't always know how to ask to be held. You don't always know how to say, I'm not okay. You don't always know how to let yourself fall apart in front of someone else. So you keep it together, you keep showing up, you keep being the strong one, and quietly you start to feel alone even when you're surrounded by people. That loneliness doesn't come from a lack of love. It comes from a lack of emotional balance. And over time, that imbalance starts to create resentment. Not the loud kind of resentment that explodes in anger, but the quiet kind that settles into your body. The kind that shows up as emotional fatigue. The kind that makes you want to withdraw. The kind that makes you crave silence and solitude because it feels like the only place where you don't have to carry anyone else's emotions. I've realized that one of the reasons I value my alone time so deeply now is because it's the only space where I'm not emotionally responsible for anyone else. When I'm alone, I don't have to absorb moods. I don't have to manage emotional energy. I don't have to regulate anyone else's feelings. I can just be. I can breathe. I can exist without holding something together. And that realization was both freeing and sad. Freeing because it showed me how much weight I had been carrying without realizing it. Sad because it made me see how long I had gone without giving myself that same care and gentleness I offered to everyone else. The emotional cost of having no emotional boundaries is not just burnout. It's the slow erosion of your sense of self. It's the quiet belief that your needs are secondary. It's the pattern of showing up for everyone else while slowly abandoning yourself. And the truth is, you can love people deeply and still need emotional boundaries. Those two things can exist at the same time. Loving people does not require losing yourself. Caring for others does not require carrying what was never meant to be yours to carry. The moment I realized I was emotionally overextended, I don't think I had one dramatic movie scene moment where I suddenly realized I was emotionally overextended. It was quieter and slower than that. It was more like a series of small realizations that started stacking on top of each other until I couldn't ignore the pattern anymore. What's strange to me is that for a long time, I didn't even realize this is what I was doing. I didn't have language for it. I didn't sit there and think, wow, I'm taking on other people's insecurities and emotional weight. I just felt drained. I felt heavy. I felt emotionally tired in a way that didn't match what was actually happening in my own life. There were moments where I would walk away from conversations feeling weighed down, even when nothing particularly heavy had happened to me personally. And I couldn't quite explain why. It wasn't until I started actually saying how I felt out loud that the pattern became clearer to me. When you say things out loud, sometimes you hear yourself for the first time. Sometimes you realize, oh, this isn't just me being tired. This is me carrying things that aren't mine. I started noticing how often I was holding space for other people's insecurities, how often I was absorbing emotional energy that wasn't actually connected to my own feelings or experiences. And once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. That awareness was uncomfortable because once you become aware of a pattern, you can't pretend it's not there anymore. You can't keep telling yourself, this is just how relationships work, when you start to see that you're the one doing most of the emotional carrying. Awareness changes the relationship you have with your own exhaustion. It makes you realize that the tiredness isn't random. It's coming from somewhere, And I think that's one of the hardest parts of emotional boundaries. You don't usually realize they're missing until you feel the weight of not having them. You don't wake up one day knowing exactly where your emotional limits are. You begin to understand them through experience. You begin to see them in the moments when you feel drained, resentful, or emotionally raw after interactions that should not leave you feeling that way. For me, the realization came with this quiet internal question. Why do I feel responsible for how other people feel? Why do I feel the need to manage other people's emotions? Why do I feel guilty when someone is uncomfortable, even when their discomfort is not caused by me? Those questions didn't come with easy answers. They came with discomfort. They came with a lot of internal unraveling. Because when you start asking those questions, you start seeing how deeply ingrained that pattern is. There was also grief in that awareness. Grief for how long I had been operating this way without knowing. Grief for how many times I had put my own emotional needs last because I didn't even realize I was allowed to put them first. Grief for the version of me who thought carrying other people's emotional weight was just part of being loving. But there was also relief in naming it, relief in realizing that feeling emotionally drained didn't mean I was broken or weak. It meant I was human. It meant I had limits. It meant I had been functioning without emotional boundaries for a long time, and my nervous system was finally asking for something different. Awareness doesn't instantly fix the pattern. I didn't suddenly become great at emotional boundaries overnight. I still catch myself wanting to carry things that aren't mine. I still feel that pull to absorb other people's emotions because that's what I've always done. But now, when I feel that familiar heaviness settle into my chest, I pause. I ask myself, is this mine to carry? And sometimes just asking that question is the boundary. That moment of awareness didn't change everything, but it changed me. It gave me language for what I was feeling. And once you have language for something, you have a little more power to respond to it differently. The grief and guilt of choosing yourself. No one really talks about the grief that comes with setting emotional boundaries. We talk about boundaries like they're empowering and freeing and healthy, and all of that can be true. But what people don't always prepare you for is how much loss you can feel when you start choosing yourself. There is a grief that comes with realizing you can't show up the same way you used to. There is a sadness in admitting that certain dynamics no longer work for you. And there is a quiet mourning of the version of yourself who could carry everything without breaking. Choosing yourself emotionally can feel like abandonment, even when it's not. It can feel like you're walking away from people you care about. It can feel like you're letting someone down. And if you're someone who has spent most of your life being the steady one, the strong one, the one who holds space for everyone else, stepping back from that role can feel like you're failing at something you were once praised for. There's also guilt that creeps in. Guilt for needing space, guilt for not having the same emotional capacity you once had, guilt for protecting your peace when someone else is struggling. And that guilt can be heavy. It can make you question your own goodness. It can make you wonder if you're becoming cold or selfish or detached. It can make you second guess your boundaries even when you know deep down that those boundaries are what you need to survive and stay emotionally healthy. I felt that guilt deeply. There are moments where I've wondered if I'm being too distant, if I'm being too protective of my time and energy, if I'm letting people down by not showing up the way I used to. And those thoughts don't come from a place of truth. They come from old patterns. They come from years of equating love with self-sacrifice. They come from a belief that being needed is the same thing as being loved. But being needed is not the same as being loved. And being loved should not require you to abandon yourself. There is also grief in realizing that some relationships can't come with you into this next version of your life. Not because anyone is bad or wrong, but because the dynamic was built around you overextending emotionally. When you stop overextending, the relationship changes. Sometimes it adjusts and grows in a healthier way, and sometimes it falls away. And that loss can hurt even when you know the boundary was necessary. It's okay to grieve that. It's okay to miss the version of yourself who could give endlessly, even if that version of you was slowly burning out. It's okay to feel sad about the space that boundaries create. Boundaries create space, and space can feel empty at first. It can feel lonely. It can feel unfamiliar, but that space is also where you begin to hear yourself again. It's where you begin to feel your own needs again. It's where you begin to rebuild a relationship with yourself that isn't constantly filtered through other people's emotions. Choosing yourself doesn't mean you stop caring. It means you start caring for yourself in a way you may not have known how to before. It means you're learning that your emotional well-being matters too. It means you're honoring your limits instead of pushing past them out of guilt or obligation. And if this season feels heavy, if it feels like you're losing parts of your old life along with the parts that were hurting you, that doesn't mean you're doing something wrong. It means you're in the middle of grieving an old way of being while slowly learning how to live in a new one. That grief is not a sign of failure, it's a sign of growth. What emotional boundaries look like now? I want to be really honest about something. I am not sitting here talking about emotional boundaries as someone who has it all figured out. I'm not an expert. I'm not healed. I'm not above anyone else. I am still very much in the middle of learning what this even looks like in real life. I've made a lot of mistakes in my life. I've handled things imperfectly. There are moments I look back on and wish I had shown up differently, spoken differently, chosen differently. I'm not proud of every version of myself, but I am proud of the fact that I'm willing to look at myself honestly now. What emotional boundaries look like for me now is awareness. It's noticing when I start to feel that familiar heaviness in my chest after certain conversations. It's recognizing when I feel emotionally drained in a way that doesn't actually belong to me. It's paying attention to my body and my nervous system instead of overriding them out of habit. For a long time, I ignored those signals. I thought being tired was just part of life. I thought feeling emotionally heavy was just part of caring deeply. Now I'm starting to see those signals as information. Emotional boundaries for me now also look like permission. Permission to pause before responding. Permission to take space when I need to regulate myself. Permission to not fix everything. Permission to let other people sit with their own emotions without immediately trying to carry them for them. That one is hard for me. I still have that instinct to step in, to soothe, to make things lighter, but I'm learning that sometimes the most loving thing I can do is allow someone else to hold their own emotional experience without absorbing it as my responsibility. It also looks like being honest with myself about my limits. There are seasons of my life where I have more emotional capacity, and there are seasons where I don't. Right now, I'm in a season of rebuilding. I'm learning how to take care of myself in ways I never really did before. I'm learning what sustains me, what drains me, what brings me peace, and what quietly takes it away. And I'm allowing myself to make choices based on that, even when those choices feel uncomfortable or unfamiliar. I'm also learning that emotional boundaries don't have to be dramatic. They don't always look like big conversations or confrontations. Sometimes they look like choosing not to engage in certain emotional dynamics. Sometimes they look like stepping back quietly. Sometimes they look like protecting your energy without needing to explain yourself to everyone. That doesn't mean I'm shutting people out. It means I'm learning to show up in ways that don't cost me my own well-being. And I want to say this clearly. I'm not claiming to have all the answers. I'm not claiming to be healed or finished or above anyone else in their own process. I'm a work in progress. I'm learning, I'm growing, I'm healing in layers. What I am doing now is figuring out what I need to sustain myself in this season of my life. I'm figuring out what allows me to show up as me without constantly abandoning parts of myself to be what everyone else needs. That's what emotional boundaries look like for me right now. Not perfection, not certainty, just a willingness to listen to myself in a way I didn't know how to before. If you're listening to this and something in you is starting to shift, maybe you're noticing how much you've been carrying for other people. Maybe you're realizing how often you've put your own emotional needs last. Or maybe you're just feeling a little more aware of yourself than you were before you pressed play. I want you to know that this kind of awareness is not small. It's not dramatic. It's quiet, but it matters. There is something really powerful about beginning to see your own patterns with honesty and compassion. Not to judge yourself for how you've lived before, but to understand yourself better moving forward. You did the best you could with what you knew at the time, and now you're learning something new about yourself. That's growth. That's healing. That's you choosing to pay attention to your own emotional world in a way you maybe never had space to do before. Emotional boundaries don't change overnight, and they don't come with a manual. They're something you feel your way into. You try, you notice, you adjust, you mess up, you try again. And little by little, you start building a life that feels a little more peaceful, a little more honest, and a little more like your own. If this episode connected with you and you want to keep sitting with these kinds of reflections, you can find more of them over on my website at mommadramaandtrauma.com, where I share written reflections and resources for anyone walking through healing and rebuilding. And if you want to connect in real time, I'd love to have you there. You can find me on Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook at Momma Drama and Trauma, and on YouTube, where I share longer conversations and reflections around these same themes. However you're moving through this season of your life, I'm really glad you spent this time here with me. As always, you are strong, you are worthy, and your story matters. Until next time, take care of you.